Good morning, everybody. Some of you might watch this recording after it's been recorded, and for those of you that are in attendance, thank you very much for attending. And I hope that I can shed some light on the subject of COBie and how it is applied through the BIM Interoperability Tools within Revit. It is something that does come up from time to time within the industry, especially on the larger projects that we find on the international scene, the Middle East, England and America. And because that is the background to the session, that's what we're going to focus on. So I want to start off, some of the documentation that I got hold of has to do with hospitals. Hospitals are very complex entities, many systems and critical systems that are there for the safety of patients and the public, and for that reason they must be properly maintained. Very expensive as well. Some of the most expensive buildings in the world to put up per square meter. Recently with COVID, I think we all remember the tremendous job that the Chinese professionals did by building these hospitals in Wuhan, and they built them in almost just 2 weeks, which is an incredible feat. So in the background to a project like this, there would be, sorry about that, there would be planning, so design, and then planning, logistics, and then ultimately facilities management. Although this is a crisis situation where the hospitals might not be there forever, there's still maintenance to be performed because none of these systems can fail. So there are still checklists and warranties to components. There's an entire ecosystem around the hospital that needs to be maintained. 90% of planning is where the battle is won. So how do we manage this? We manage it through coding and specifically through, in this case, COBie. And on the right-hand side, we can also see the efforts that New York put into it. So those, of course, are two big nations. The Russians also built a hospital, and many other peoples also built these hospitals. They were fantastic. But in New York, they did something else, which is also interesting, is that they looked at existing buildings and then how to retrofit these buildings as hospitals. And so you had the Army engineers going into New York and inspecting certain buildings and seeing if they could change the buildings into a hospital. But again, the information that's going to go into those buildings afterwards, that is how it's going to be managed with. In this case, probably short term, but in a typical building like you see standing in the background there on the skyline, that might take a long time. So data, for most people, in the architectural industry is kind of boring or bland. It essentially looks like a spreadsheet. It's a component and it's got information that's recorded against the component. So I'm going to try in a limited sense to make this presentation a little bit more interesting because it is a relatively, for most architects, boring topic. And I'm going to follow the advice of my high school principal, a certain Dr. Gibbon, who said to us, if you want to remember something, try and make an association which is not normal, and then you can remember it for a long time. So, I've tried to weave a little bit of an analogy in here, and just to help everybody remember that you've seen something that's out of the ordinary, but you remember it's about COBie, and that's ultimately what we are aiming for. The agenda today, so well, do excuse me for taking a bit of latitude just to try and make it a little bit more interesting, because I know some guys just go to sleep when they hear about COBie and other guys want to run away again. I don't know. To me, it's very interesting. I like data. I like boring spreadsheets. That's me, but I think most other people don't enjoy boring spreadsheets. Okay. Or rather, should I say, I find it interesting what one can do with the information that's in the spreadsheets. There's a lot of money to be made out of a situation like this. It can improve the bottom line of the company, and ultimately save everybody a lot of grief. So what is COBie? We're going to look at that. Where and how is COBie used? And then Autodesk BIM Interoperability Tools. So if you've attended one of the earlier webinars, you'll know that BIM Interoperability Tools is used to record information into the model. We've looked already in one of the earlier webinars at applying the British standard or the American standard or any other standard or even a custom standard to a model. One of the comments that was made there was that COBie should be set up for the model. If COBie is a prerequisite for the model to have, then COBie must be set up first before the standards are applied, because some of those codes will go into COBie. All right. Just as background. And then Autodesk BIM Interoperability Tools, yeah, so where can you get hold of them and how do you install them and so on. How do I set up my project? How do I enter the information into my model? And how do I export the information from my model? Those things are all important. Hi, good morning, Trevor. I don't know if you can hear us, but welcome to the presentation. I'm glad you could make it. You're welcome to ask questions at any time. You can break into the audio via your microphone, or otherwise you can also ask any questions here in the chat box at any time that you feel that you have a question that you'd like to have addressed. So we've just been discussing the agenda. You can see it on the screen there. So I've just been saying that I'm going to try and make the presentation a little bit more interesting, just to sort of bring a point across about what COBie is and how we can use that. So where, you know, information can be quite boring, but we don't want that. We want to remember what we are seeing during the presentation. Sorry, just want to get to the, just lost my presentation here. There we go. All right, so what is COBie? COBie stands for Construction, Operations, Building Information Exchange. This definition is directly from the NBS. I've quoted them directly. It's a great definition. It's a non-proprietary data format for the publication of a subset of building information models focused on delivering asset data as distinct from geometric information. So these are who is the manufacturer, who installed, or which contractor installed the piece of equipment. When and how must the equipment be maintained, and does it have a warranty? And it can even go through into asset management, where we are looking at when a large piece of equipment becomes too old, we need to replace that with something that is new, much like a car. Right? So that's the idea behind it. The origin of COBie is within the Department of Defense of the United States. They initiated this format to manage their buildings with, and then the British as well as other countries then latched onto the COBie standard, and they are mandating this now within certain projects. This is taken directly from a Department of Defense requirement, and you can see how contractually COBie would be stated as a deliverable for the building, and then just to show that it is, it is within the documentation. So should you do work in America or in some of the other parts of the world, this is what would be required of you. This is a good example. I don't know if they actually use COBie here. They might use some other standard, but this is a great new, it's one of the biggest and most complex buildings in the world. They're building in France. It's a new, they call it ITER, right? It's a thermonuclear device, which is a power generator. And you can imagine within a building like this, it's more a machine of a building, but there's an enormous amount of maintenance that would go into a situation like this. So how's COBie used? Well, it's used to make complex assets more easier to understand and to manage by the code. And it's great to make a start. Most guys, what I've seen, not most guys, some guys in the industry, when they see that COBie is a deliverable, then they try and get out of it. I would say rather have a go and see if you can incorporate COBie into the building, because if you make a start, then you can iterate onto the next project and become better at this process, and then just apply the international standard. So what COBie would do, I just use this analogy of a little try sail or a storm sail, storm jib, stormed Genoa or Jenny on the force day, and it's a very critical component. If you're stuck out there in the middle of nowhere and something over here breaks, maybe one of the hanks, then the sail would come loose, you'll lose your steering, and in all probability you will suffer damage or go down. So similarly with buildings and hospitals, if the systems fail in the operating theaters, then people are going to perish, and we don't want that. Similarly, nuclear power reactors, and that's critical systems, but we have also got normal systems. Maintenance is very important. We need maintenance. So every now and then we will check our hanks and make sure that they're all functioning correctly, that they're not cracked or corroded, and then we can have our storm jib on our force day. And I just thought it was quite cute that there is an analogy between Hollywood and the CERN, or rather the atomics research facility that they've got in France and in Switzerland. It's a big European project, but I think it's very exciting. It's one of the biggest projects in the world. And I can just imagine the sort of BIM that is going on there. It must be amazing. All right, so where and how is COBie used? This is a grid. In this grid, you can see various standards listed. PAS L192, this is already old. It's been superseded by the ISO standards, ISO 19605 or 19650, and A and B. And then you can see here's COBie UK 2012. So there's an actual COBie standard. I'm going to get that for you and you can see what it looks like. So collaborative production of information, fulfilling employers' information exchange requirements using COBie, go to practice. So this document would be referenced within the standards. And it's got an explanation. It's quite long-winded, so I won't go through everything in detail, but one would have to go through this entire document and see exactly how it fits together. The BIM manager, or the information manager rather, of the project, they would have to go through all of this and see exactly what they need to put into that building. And that's it. So from a standards point of view, the standard is already there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The British have already got that. And then we can see it's used for guidance. It's used for classificatory requirements. In this case, to classify elements, and then also to practice facilities maintenance, or to use the COBie deliverable that we're going to get out of this. If you've never seen this before, take some time to try and get to terms with it. We talk about BIM maturity levels. That you can see at the top over there. That's BIM maturity 0, level 1, level 2, and level 3. The level 0 is where we are just dealing with two-dimensional drawing, sort of 1950s, 60s mentality about it. In level 1, we are drawing in 2D, but also in 3D. This is where we start getting into the idea of, okay, we're going to use something like Revit to model up our walls and our doors and our windows. And if we start following some standard, I just put COBie in here just to illustrate that COBie could be applicable over here. It typically isn't used at the beginning of the project. It's more to use here when we've got the asset information model, or the systems information model, or the facilities information model. The ones with the B before them has to do with bridges specifically. But these are information models, where you can think of it as an as-built model. So in other words, after it's been designed, how is it built? Record the differences, and then once equipment is being installed, then we're going to start entering the COBie information into the as-built model. And that carries on if we're doing level 3 BIM or IBIM. Then we're going to get into the life cycle asset management, where we want to now start managing this asset. We can do it in terms of looking at that asset on its own, or we can say that we want to consider it in terms of a smart city. So something like that is also possible. And this is now what the background to it is. So the UK would be somewhere between level 2 and level 3. Places like Singapore, some places in China, they've got regions that are operating at level 3. where things like infrastructure is also dependent on the buildings that are designed. So it's a very exciting field with a very large audience, and it's very exciting. So that is how we think about this. But the standard that's used to it is COBie. Often could be someone else or something else, but in the English world, usually COBie. And this is how it fits into the delivery cycle. All right. So try and remember the word cycle that's used for a delivery cycle. And this is a typical drawing that we are used to. In the past, at the beginning of BIM, people used to show this as a sawtooth diagram where always information is lost between stages. And I'd like to spend some time explaining this to you. The employer has requirements, the employer being the owner of the building or the entity that would requisition the project. That might be the British Parliament. So if you can think about something like HS2, that would be a project or some other government building. It could be a corporate entity, or it could just be a private owner. If they've, property developers, it could be one of many people. They usually have a BIM consultant on their side, which then states what they want from the building. And then the supply chain will respond through putting together a BIM execution plan. And the supply chain that is then selected will go on to do the project. The stages of the project, we should be familiar with the brief of a project, what's required, the concept, so the conceptual design, and then the definition. That's where we usually come in South Africa, at least, overseas. They kind of do the conceptual design, right? And then we go through into the detailed design of the building, and then into the construction of the building, and then ultimately the close over and the handout. So anything from stage number 5, 6, 7, and 8, which isn't here, but it's in use. You can actually add one more to this list, which is deconstruction, because these days buildings are designed to be deconstructed as well and recycled in a circular economy. That's very exciting. So 60% of the world's energy is used in buildings, and we need to reduce that amount of energy. So recycling is very important. Reusing materials, very, very important. Now, where COBie fits in here is that, at number 6 and number 7, but it could even be 1, 2, and 3. These are employers' decision points. So that's when the owner, the guy with the money, the checkbook, that's where he would come out and write a check and say, after the brief of the project, let me see what you've done. Can we see that you've done the work that is required? If so, then we'll pay you some more money to go through the conceptual design and then have you given us the required information. And so we go through these cycles. Now, critically, in this diagram, what you can see between definition and design, this is where the client takes a backseat after this point. Then the process of design, build and commission, and handover and closeout is completed, and then there's another data drop. And that data drop shows you OpEx start. The operational expenditure within the building's life cycle starts. This is where the COBie drop starts. Now you'll see COBie is Excel spreadsheet based, and in developed countries or developed markets, the data is automatically evaluated by a program. So it will read the information from the Excel spreadsheet, evaluate whether the information was input, and then deliver some idea, at least to the client, as to whether the correct information has been applied. And then I'd just like to make a point as well about COBie is you don't need to be, think COBie is this really difficult thing to do. It isn't. It's just a lot of work. So learn to demystify COBie. You want to just understand what it is and apply the codes. And apply the code for facilities management. And then be optimistic. You know, if you think about all of these people working in conjunction over here, each one of those people has a mirror, and they are reflecting the sun onto a ship. Now, the purpose of this exercise was to burn the ship. but the ship did not burn. So make a start and maybe start with an idea, and if the idea doesn't work, then try something else. Yeah. Or just carry on and make it better. Ultimately, today we've got solar power that is helping with buildings and PV glass and so on. So maybe another idea. But iterate through those ideas and then ultimately work together, the entire supply chain, the contractors, everybody that's inputting the information, and see if we can get the desired result out of that. Right. And then record critical data and apply good leadership. It's not some code that needs to be cracked. It is very simple. It is just information that you input. So don't think that it's, it's just a lot of work. And I think that's also a good thing, because there's the information that can be done with the data, the big data that you input. That's where the actual job creation sits. So people to input data, that's quite a boring job. You can get relatively low-skilled people to do that. But then to do something interesting with the data, that's something else entirely again. So across the entire spectrum, everything from data input people into programmers and data scientists, all of these people can use this data. Right. The Autodesk BIM Interoperability Tools, they're free. It comes with Revit. You can, it's published by Autodesk, and you can download it from your Autodesk account. They're tools for managing standards in BIM models. Codes and parameters are used downstream, like we've seen now, downstream from the building itself into facilities management. Previously, the codes, some of the codes that we apply is 4D scheduling and 5D scheduling and costing and quantity surveying, right? That was dealt in an earlier webinar. This one specifically is about facilities management. It's about recording information about the assets. So if something should break, who do we phone? Who installed it? And is there a warranty on the thing, or so on? Yeah. What's the maintenance schedule? Typical information that we need to input for each and every component that's in the building. This is what they look like when you install them. On the right-hand side in your Autodesk account. And on the left-hand side there, you can see the Autodesk Classification Manager, the model checker. There's a nice model checking application as well. For those of you that do want to check your models, Autodesk Model Checker Configuration, the Autodesk Enhanced DWG Exporter, and then here we get to the COBie one, Autodesk COBie extension for Revit, and the Autodesk COBie extension from Navisworks as well. So you can also plug it into Navisworks. Right. In this webinar, we're just looking at Revit. This is what the interface looks like when you install these tools. The COBie extension is shown under this tab over here. You've got some tools. You can set up families, set up the project, contacts, import and export, zones, select, update, and create a spreadsheet. So those are the controls, and that's what it looks like when you install it. And then when you set up your project at the beginning, then you will have these categories. So general information, the spaces, the types, the components, the systems, the attributes, and the coordinates and schedules. These are what's important to anybody looking at COBie information. Which area are we in? You can see by default here, they've got the United States and the United Kingdom. The identification, are they going to be using a Revit element ID? So Revit element ID is a relatively short number, which means that you've got a chance between one project and the next project that you're going to have separate entities with the same ID. You don't want that. So in this case, a GUID, a global unique identifier, it's a nice long number, or a map parameter. And then the units, you can use default or you can specify the units, and the area measurement standard. Unfortunately, only for America and the UK are they defined. And then we've got the spaces, so which elements are going to be read by room or by space. Right? So if you would like to have your air terminals to be listed under spaces, then it will do that. Or if you want them to be listed under rooms, then it will do that instead. So furniture for rooms, air components for spaces, that would make sense from an engineering point of view. We've got the type setup. Right? So how do we build up the name for the family as it's going to be recorded within the spreadsheet? And you've got priorities on the right-hand side where you can say first this, then that, then that. So you've got some control over that. These things should already be set out within the schema of the, or it should be stipulated as a schema within the BIM execution plan. And you can see some examples of that towards the end of this pretty standard that delve into the way in which this would be set up. So anybody that likes structured data and likes to program against structured data is going to require you to set this up in a certain method, right? If you're the principal agent, then that might be you. Those are the components. So what are you going to use? Are you going to use a separator? We typically don't use minus signs or dashes or any weird characters, but you use underscore, okay, to separate words. And then in this one, for instance, it's just going to take the Revit category and the mark number. But you could use some other designator, maybe the code, the classification code of the country, right? There's your systems. I'm just going to the next. There we go. There's the attributes that you can input for a type, right? So there's cable trays, furniture, anything that you find in there, and then in the type parameters, there's a list of elements that you can choose from there. The coordinate setup, you want to use the bounding box around the elements, or and then the schedules that you can see coming out there, right? So it looks like a lot, but understand that if you're working to a protocol and if you have somebody to help you to set it up, then it's simply a question of later on entering the data. What this does when you install or when you set the project up is it creates project parameters. I can show this to you over here. This is one of my projects. And if you scroll down on the, let's take a chair for instance. If you scroll down on the instance properties, you won't see any information of under the data heading. And if you look at the type properties also under the data, there is some information here, but that's just classificatory. That's not yet COBie. And if I had to go and apply, if I had to go to my project setup, I'm just going to use the defaults except for the component level. Types. Okay. I'm just going to expand all and select all. So this is now based on the COBie. It's going to generate these parameters in my building. And there you can see how it's now generating the project parameters that it will apply to the elements. So if you know how you want to set your project up, and for that you can ask your BIM manager or your information manager for the project, they will then help you set up everything over here according to the standard that is required. This automatically generates your schedules for you. They are your COBie schedules. And then on the elements themselves, just clicking on that chair again, I can now see that there's a lot of information over here. In this case, and then also in the type. Scroll down to data, and they will find the COBie parameters that were created. Now this is where you would fill in the information manually, or what I've even thought in the past is that you could use Dynamo to read and write into the components from an Excel spreadsheet or an external database if you wanted, but that's more an information systems management question from the enterprise system. In this case, you could just get somebody to sit there and fill out the information for all the chairs. So that's where you might get somebody that's not quite an architect to sit there and say, right, the guys have actually bought this chair now, it's come into storage, and we're going to install it in the room. Let's go and record the information from it. Who is the manufacturer? You know, how long is the warranty, etc., etc., etc. And that is the information that we input for each and every component. So setting up the project is not difficult. And then what's nice about the about these files, all right, is if you go to the website, the BIM Interoperability Tools here from the COBie extension for Revit, then you can also go all the way down here and you'll see there are some sample files. And these are very helpful. So there you can see the sample Revit 2021, 2020, 2019, and 2018 models. And then there's also a sample Excel file. Now that sample Excel file is instructive. This is what it looks like. This is the project information that was recorded for this project. These are the contacts that were recorded for the building. The facility, floors, spaces, all the spaces that you find there. You can see the gross area, the net area. We've got usable height, room tag, external identifier, and so on. So all of this information is now coming out of the building. Right. Now, what can you do with something like this? Well, it's Excel spreadsheet. So if you wanted to, you could now input the information in. If the information wasn't recorded, you could input the information in the spreadsheet and then read it back into your model by importing. Well, you can import COBie settings, but you can use the Dynamo also to write them back, all right, into your model. That's one of the things that you could do before the time if you know who you're going to buy things from. Then we've got the zones, similar to rooms, the types. Now these are the type properties that you find within your model, so that would be this information there. Just going to tab onto that chair. That's this information that you find over here. Those are the type. And then there's the actual components themselves. So you can see this will probably not be so many. The total length of the spreadsheet is 218. So there's 218 types. But there's probably going to be more components. There are lots of components. There's 3,957 components within this building. And the information for them is recorded in there. Then we've got systems. Systems are things like your HVAC systems, right, or your electrical systems, your attributes, and coordinates and lists. So each element would have their coordinates recorded, would have the information recorded, and then ultimately over here we've got our lists. So it's quite a long list. No. So probably you can, if you need to classify an element, then you could pick it from this list using some other drop-down control over here. Sure. Okay, then that's with regards to setting up the project. There you can see the parameters, where they exist and how to set them up. You can export them as well. That's quite a simple project. And you can see that in the Revit. Okay, so if you've got a model like this, this is the sample model that they've supplied with BIM Interoperability Tools. So this is where somebody's already set up a project and entered some information, not all of the information, because it is probably a sample. Right? So over there we've got a door. That's the front door of this building. And if we click on this door, then we can see the COBie parameter. It's on, so it's going to get exported. It was created by a certain person within the United States Army. And there we've got when it was created. What is the component name? Now that is the instance properties of this. And if we look at the type properties, then we're going to find there's some more information. So again, it's Mary Angelica Gasquillo that created this. And that's the date that they created it on, what the door type is, it's fixed, and then warranty character parts, and then labor warranty. You see the duration of that, probably 3 years. Expected life of the door is 20, the duration. And so you can see that myself or somebody else that would like to read that information and crunch the numbers to find out or to set up a maintenance schedule. So 20 years from now, that building probably has to have that door, have a look at it, because by that stage this door is going to be worn out, or the hinges need to be replaced, or maybe even just replace the entire door. So I know I need to plan from a financial perspective. I need to plan for maintenance that might be forecast into the future, or to replace components entirely. And when these things are installed, then I know that. Or if somebody comes there with a defective hinge and the door falls off and breaks, then I can go and look at that component and I can say, right, this door broke. You wouldn't obviously do it through the Revit interface, because think about it, 80 years from now, is Revit even going to be there? We don't know. So the three-dimensional aspect of the building might be recorded in something like an industry foundation class file, which would also hold the information, but ultimately the non-graphical data about who installed that building, who installed the door, and so onwards is recorded within the COBie data. But through the graphical user interface of Revit, supposing that this door would break, we would then be able to go in and see who's responsible for that, and then we see, it's these guys. And we must, so the labor warranty at acme.com. We must find them, and we must say, well, it's been 2 years and the door fell off, so it fell off because you guys didn't install it properly. Now please come and fix it. And that's the sort of information that we want out of the building, the management of the asset. And each of these elements would then be like that. There's an example. Right, so again, we can see who modeled it, looking at the type properties. There's not much to be said about that. Some of the other components, there's an airside component, the instance properties, and the type properties. Okay, so clearly they just put some numbers in there, but that would be your independent contractors. And how you structure the input of that information is obviously also important. So that's really what I've got to show you from a Revit perspective. I think another important part is to show you that you've got these sample files and so on, and then if you, or when you install it and you get stuck and you don't know what to do, click on the help button. And you can see they've got a user manual. It's really video files. So it's not a short webinar like this. It's a very focused set of videos. COBie is very important overseas, and so here you can learn in detail how to do each one of these parts of the workflow. But I know some guys in South Africa are working on buildings that has a COBie deliverable, and if you've got any queries as to how you go about that, hopefully I would have demonstrated that today, that you take the BIM Interoperability Tools, install them, set up the project, and then just input the information as the components are brought. So BIM Interoperability Tools, you can always contact us here at Micrographics. And then the NBS is a very good website as well. If you're not familiar with it, the NBS, they've got some great information here on COBie as well. So maybe search them for COBie. What is COBie? This was done in 2018. It's a very good article, and there's a lot of articles on COBie there. Nice video that you can watch, and a better explanation. You can see the same diagram over here that we explained. So this is a very good website, and it's got great resources. The NBS, the National Building Services, I think they call them. And then we've got BSI group. So over here you can get hold of the British standards if you were interested. And then also the BIM Institute of South Africa. They are also very interested in standards that are applied throughout South Africa. So if you haven't joined them or registered with them yet, maybe also have a look at the BIM Institute of South Africa. So that's really all that is included in this webinar. So the floor is open for questions if you guys have any. I don't know if any of you are actually working on projects that's got COBie specified at the moment. Yeah. Maybe not yet, but I think it's going to be something that's going to come in the future, especially also if you work on projects in the future in the Middle East or in other parts of the world. 10 to 1, you're going to come across facilities management. And sometimes it's going to be COBie that's going to be deliverable, and then hopefully you'll remember this webinar and just know where to go and what to do. And maybe if you've got some friends that are BIM managers or information managers on BIM teams, you can also redirect them to us here at Micrographics, and you can see our contact information on the screen there. We have recorded this webinar and we'll be posting it up onto the internet shortly. Right, everyone, I didn't receive any questions on this, but I hope you get involved with COBie. It's a very exciting field, information modeling and data mining, and there's a lot of possibilities that are encapsulated within the practice. Thank you very much for attending. And I hope you guys have a great day further, and also a great year from here onwards as we recover from COVID. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye.